The morning sun cast long shadows across the gardens of Kensington Palace as Princess Catherine walked along the familiar stone pathway. She had always found peace in these early morning walks, away from the constant attention and formal ceremonies that filled her days. The air was crisp, and the October leaves crunched softly beneath her feet as she made her way toward the private rose garden that had become her sanctuary. What Catherine didn't know was that someone had been watching her routine for weeks. Lavra Parker Bowles, the fictional daughter of Queen Camilla from a previous relationship that had been kept hidden from the public, stood behind the thick hedge that bordered the garden's eastern edge. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the small device in her hands, a creation that had taken her months to perfect in the basement workshop of her modest London apartment. Laura's resentment toward the royal family had been building for years. While her half-brother Tom Parker Bowles lived openly as part of the extended royal circle, she had been forced to remain in the shadows. Her mother, now Queen Camilla, had made it clear that Laura's existence would complicate the carefully crafted royal narrative. The monthly payments that arrived in her bank account felt more like hush money than family support, and the rare, awkward phone calls from her mother only deepened her sense of abandonment. The device in Laura's hands was no bigger than a smartphone, but it contained enough explosive material to cause serious harm. She had researched the components online, using her background in chemistry from her university days to create something that would send a clear message. She didn't want to kill anyone, she told herself repeatedly. She just wanted to shake the foundations of the institution that had rejected her. To force her mother to acknowledge her existence publicly, Catherine paused near the ornate fountain in the center of the garden, pulling out her phone to check messages from her children's school. The princess had always prided herself on being hands-on with George, Charlotte, and Louis, despite the demands of royal duty. This morning was particularly important because she was scheduled to visit a children's hospital later, and she wanted to review the patient list one more time to ensure she could give each child the personal attention they deserved from her hiding spot. Lavra watched Catherine's routine unfold exactly as she had observed so many times before. The princess would spend exactly 12 minutes in the rose garden, then walk back along the main path toward the palace's east wing. Lavra had timed it perfectly. She would activate the device when Catherine was at the fountain, far enough away to avoid serious injury, but close enough to send an unmistakable message. As Laura's finger hovered over the activation button, her phone buzzed with a text message from her mother. The irony wasn't lost on her that Queen Camilla chose this moment to reach out, probably scheduling another awkward lunch where they would dance around the truth of their relationship. Lavra almost laughed at the timing, but the sound caught in her throat as she read the message. Meanwhile, Catherine had finished checking her messages and was walking toward the fountain's edge, where she always took a moment to appreciate the intricate stonework that had been installed during Queen Victoria's reign. The princess had developed a deep appreciation for the history that surrounded her daily life, often spending quiet moments connecting with the generations of royals who had walked these same paths. Laura's hand shook as she prepared to press the button. Years of suppressed anger and rejection fueled her determination, but something about seeing Catherine in person, vulnerable and alone in the early morning light, made her hesitate. The princess looked smaller than she appeared in photographs, more human somehow. Lavra had spent so much time thinking of the royal family as an untouchable institution that she had forgotten they were individual people with their own struggles and fears. The sound of footsteps on gravel made both women freeze. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell was making her early morning security rounds, a routine she had established after joining the Royal Protection Detail 6 months earlier. Unlike many of her colleagues who focused primarily on external threats, Sarah had always believed that the most dangerous attacks came from those who could blend into the royal environment. Undetected. Sarah had noticed unusual patterns in the surveillance footage from the past few weeks. Someone had been observing the garden area during Catherine's morning walks, always staying just outside the camera's range but leaving subtle signs of their presence. Broken twigs, disturbed mulch, and cigarette butts that hadn't been there the day before all pointed to regular surveillance activity. As Sarah rounded the corner of the hedge, she spotted Lavra immediately. The young woman's nervous posture and the way she clutched something in her hands triggered every alarm in Sarah's training. Without making a sound, the detective inspector began moving closer, using the landscaping as cover while radioing for backup in a voice barely above a whisper. Catherine remained oblivious to the drama unfolding just meters away. She had moved to the fountain's far side and was examining the climbing roses that had recently been planted there. The princess made a mental note to ask the head gardener about adding similar varieties to the children's play area, thinking that George would enjoy learning about different flower species as part of his nature studies. Laura's internal struggle intensified as she watched Catherine's peaceful interaction with the garden. The princess seemed genuinely interested in the plants around her, not performing for cameras or maintaining a royal facade. This wasn't the cold, calculated member of an oppressive institution that Lavra had built up in her mind. This was simply a woman enjoying a quiet moment in a beautiful garden. The weight of what she was about to do suddenly felt crushing. Lavra realized that her anger toward her mother and the royal system had consumed her judgment. Hurting Catherine wouldn't bring her the acknowledgement she craved or heal the wounds of her childhood rejection. It would only create more pain and likely destroy any chance of ever having a real relationship with her mother. As these thoughts raced through her mind, Laura's finger moved away from the activation button. But her moment of clarity came too late. Sarah had positioned herself within striking distance and was preparing to intervene, not knowing whether Lavra had already triggered whatever device she was holding. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell moved with the silent precision that had made her one of the youngest officers ever assigned to the Royal Protection Detail. Her training at Hendon Police College had emphasized the importance of neutralizing threats before they could escalate. But something about this situation felt different from the standard security protocols she had memorized. Lavra stood frozen behind the hedge, her internal battle playing out across her face in expressions of doubt, anger, and regret. The device in her hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy, as if it contained the weight of all her poor decisions leading up to this moment. She had spent months planning this confrontation, imagining the headlines that would force her mother to acknowledge her existence. But now the reality of potentially harming an innocent woman made her stomach turn. Sarah could see that the suspect was having second thoughts, which created both an opportunity and a new danger. People in emotional crisis were unpredictable, and any sudden movement could trigger an unintended activation of whatever device she was holding. Sarah had seen enough improvised explosive devices during her brief assignment to counterterrorism to recognize the telltale signs of homemade construction. Catherine continued her peaceful examination of the garden, completely unaware that her life hung in the balance just meters away. She had discovered a new variety of climbing rose that she didn't recognize, and she was taking photos with her phone to share with the head gardener later. The princess had developed a genuine passion for horticulture since moving to Kensington Palace, finding that working with plants provided a meditative escape from the pressures of royal duty. The morning silence was broken by the distant sound of the palace's maintenance staff beginning their daily routines. Groundskeepers would arrive soon to tend to this section of the garden, which meant Sarah had only a few minutes to resolve the situation before civilian staff might wander into danger. She made the decision to approach Lavra directly, hoping that human connection might succeed where force could fail. Lavra heard the soft footsteps approaching from behind and knew her time had run out. Part of her felt relief that someone had finally noticed her presence after weeks of feeling invisible, even in her anger. She turned slowly to face Sarah, making sure to keep her hands visible and the device pointed away from both the detective and the direction where Catherine was walking. The two women looked at each other for a long moment, each trying to read the other's intentions. Sarah could see pain and confusion in Laura's eyes rather than the cold determination she had encountered in true terrorists. Lavra, meanwhile, recognized something unexpected in Sarah's expression, not the aggressive authority she had expected from royal security, but genuine concern for everyone involved in the situation. Sarah spoke in a low voice that wouldn't carry to Catherine's position. She introduced herself calmly and asked Lavra to explain what was happening, emphasizing that she wanted to understand rather than simply arrest her. This approach was unconventional for royal security, but Sarah's instincts told her that this young woman needed help more than punishment. Lavra found herself responding to Sarah's tone despite her original intentions. The words came tumbling out in a rushed whisper, her hidden relationship to Queen Camilla, the years of secrecy and rejection, the growing resentment that had led her to this desperate plan. As she spoke, Lavra realized how hollow her justifications sounded when voiced aloud to another person. Meanwhile, Catherine had finished photographing the roses and was walking back toward the main path, following her usual routine. She moved at a leisurely pace, stopping occasionally to appreciate particularly beautiful flower arrangements or to check her phone for updates from her staff about the day's upcoming engagements. The princess had learned to treasure these quiet moments of normalcy in her, otherwise highly scheduled, life. Sarah listened carefully to Laura's explanation while maintaining visual contact with Catherine's movement through the garden. The detective was running calculations in her mind, how long it would take for backup to arrive, the blast radius of a typical improvised device, and the safest way to evacuate Catherine without causing panic that might trigger Lavra to act. Impulsively, Laura's voice broke as she described the loneliness of growing up, knowing that her mother was one of the most famous women in the world, but being unable to claim that relationship publicly. The monthly payments that arrived in her bank account felt like payment for her silence rather than expressions of maternal care. She had watched from afar as her half-siblings enjoyed family gatherings and public recognition while she remained a carefully guarded secret. Sarah found herself genuinely moved by Laura's story, even as she maintained professional alertness to the danger the young woman posed. The detective had grown up in a working-class family where love was expressed openly, and she couldn't imagine the psychological impact of being denied acknowledgement by a parent. However, she also understood that personal pain, no matter how valid, could never justify endangering innocent lives. Catherine paused near a bench that overlooked the fountain, taking a moment to enjoy the peaceful atmosphere before returning to her duties. The princess often used these walks to prepare mentally for the day ahead, reminding herself of the privilege and responsibility that came with her position. She thought about the children she would meet at the hospital later, wondering about their stories and how she could bring some joy to their difficult circumstances. Lavra noticed Catherine's pause and felt a fresh wave of internal conflict. The princess looked so normal, so human in this unguarded moment. Lavra had spent months building up the royal family as an abstract enemy, but seeing Catherine simply enjoying a garden morning made her realize that her anger was misdirected. The institution that had rejected her was made up of individual people who had their own struggles and humanity. Sarah sensed Laura's wavering resolve and decided to take a calculated risk. She asked Lavra to hand over the device, promising that they could work together to address her legitimate grievances through proper channels. The detective emphasized that hurting Catherine wouldn't solve Laura's problems with her mother or bring her the family connection she desperately wanted. The sound of radio chatter in the distance indicated that Sarah's backup was approaching the area. Lavra heard it too and realized that her window for action was closing rapidly. She looked once more at Catherine, who was now walking directly toward the main path that would take her past their hiding spot. Laura's finger tightened on the device, not from renewed determination but from sheer nervousness about what would happen next. Catherine's phone rang, breaking the morning quiet. The princess answered cheerfully, speaking to someone about adjustments to her hospital visit schedule. Her voice carried the warm, genuine tone that had made her popular with the public, and Lavra could hear real care and engagement in how Catherine spoke about the sick children she would be visiting. This final humanizing moment broke through Laura's remaining resistance. She looked at Sarah with tears in her eyes and slowly extended the device, her hands shaking as she realized how close she had come to making an irreversible mistake that would have destroyed multiple lives, including her own. Sarah carefully accepted the device from Laura's trembling hands, immediately recognizing the crude but potentially lethal construction. Years of training had taught her to handle explosive devices with respect, and she quickly secured it in a specialized containment pouch that would minimize damage if it somehow activated. Her relief was palpable, but she knew the situation was far from resolved. Lavra collapsed onto the damp grass behind the hedge, the full weight of what she had almost done crashing over her like a physical blow. Tears streamed down her face as she realized how close she had come to destroying not only Catherine's life but her own future and any possibility of reconciliation with her mother. The months of planning and anger seemed suddenly childish and misdirected. Catherine finished her phone call and continued walking along the path, still unaware of the drama that had unfolded just meters from her position. She was discussing the details of her hospital visit with her private secretary, asking specific questions about each child she would meet and what activities would be most appropriate for their conditions. The princess had always insisted on personal briefings rather than generic talking points. Sarah spoke quietly into her radio, requesting immediate backup and a bomb disposal unit while keeping her eyes on both Lavra and Catherine's retreating figure. The detective knew that protocol required her to evacuate the entire area and detain Lavra immediately, but something about the young woman's obvious remorse made her want to handle the situation with more nuance than standard procedures allowed. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace complex, Queen Camilla was beginning her own morning routine, completely unaware that her hidden daughter had just attempted to attack her daughter-in-law. The queen consort was reviewing her schedule for a series of charity engagements, focusing particularly on organizations that supported women in crisis situations. The irony of her charitable focus while her own daughter struggled an emotional crisis was lost on her in that moment. Lavra looked up at Sarah through her tears and began speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. She explained that she had never intended to actually hurt Catherine, that the device was meant to create a minor explosion that would generate headlines and force public acknowledgement of her existence. As she spoke, Lavra realized how naive and dangerous this plan had been, how easily it could have gone wrong and caused serious injury or death. Sarah knelt down beside Lavra, maintaining the compassionate approach that had prevented a tragedy. The detective asked careful questions about Laura's background and motivations, gathering information that would be crucial for the investigation while also trying to understand the psychological factors that had led to this desperate act. Sarah had studied criminal psychology and recognized signs of abandonment, trauma in Laura's responses. Catherine reached the palace's east entrance and paused to appreciate the morning's beauty one final time before returning to her official duties. She made a mental note to bring the children to the garden later in the week, thinking that Charlotte would particularly enjoy learning about the different rose varieties. The princess valued these family moments as much as her public engagements. The sound of approaching vehicles announced the arrival of Sarah's backup team and the bomb disposal specialists. Lavra heard them coming and felt a new wave of panic. Not about her own fate, but about the possibility that news of this incident would leak to the media and cause embarrassment for Catherine and the royal family. Despite her anger toward the institution, Lavra found herself wanting to protect the individual people she had almost harmed. Sarah assured Lavra that the royal protection team was experienced in handling sensitive situations discreetly, but she also explained that there would be serious legal consequences for bringing an explosive device onto royal property. The detective emphasized that Laura's cooperation and obvious remorse would be taken into account, but that she would need to face justice for her actions. As the tactical team secured the area, Detective Chief Inspector Robert Hayes arrived to take command of the scene. Hayes was a veteran of royal security who had handled everything from assassination attempts to family disputes, and he quickly assessed the situation with the measured calm that had earned him his position. Sarah briefed him on Laura's background and the peaceful resolution she had achieved. Lavra watched the organized response with a mixture of fear and fascination. She had never seen royal security in action and was surprised by their professionalism and restraint. No one shouted or treated her roughly, despite the serious nature of her crime. This humane treatment only increased her guilt about targeting people who clearly took their responsibility. To protect others seriously, Hayes made the decision to move Lavra to a secure interview room within the palace complex rather than transporting her immediately to a police station. This choice would allow them to conduct a thorough debriefing while maintaining operational security and giving them time to decide how to handle the sensitive family connection to Queen Camilla. Catherine had entered the palace and was preparing for her first official meeting of the day when she noticed unusual activity in the security office. The princess had developed a good relationship with her protection team and could sense when something significant had occurred. She asked her private secretary to inquire discreetly about any incidents that might affect her schedule. Sarah remained with Lavra during the transfer to the interview room, having established a rapport that could be valuable for gathering intelligence about any other potential threats. The detective was also genuinely concerned about Laura's emotional state and wanted to ensure she received appropriate psychological support rather than simply being processed through the criminal justice system. Lavra found herself in a comfortable room that looked more like a business office than a police interrogation cell. The contrast between her expectations and reality continued to reinforce how wrong her assumptions about the royal family had been. She had imagined them as cold and uncaring, but every interaction had demonstrated professionalism, mixed with genuine humanity. Hayes began the formal interview process by reading Lavra her rights, but he did so in a way that emphasized the seriousness of the situation rather than trying to intimidate her. The chief inspector had dealt with many family-related security threats over the years and understood that emotional manipulation was often more effective than aggressive interrogation tactics. As Lavra began to tell her full story, starting from her earliest memories of knowing who her mother was but being unable to acknowledge that relationship publicly, Hayes realized they were dealing with a complex family dysfunction that had escalated into a criminal act. The case would require careful handling to address both the security threat and the underlying family issues. Queen Camilla's morning briefing was interrupted by an urgent message requesting her immediate presence for a security consultation. The queen consort felt a familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach, knowing that such requests usually involve serious threats to family members. She had no idea that this particular threat came from her own hidden daughter. Catherine was informed by her private secretary that there had been a minor security incident in the garden area she had visited that morning, but that the threat had been neutralized without danger to anyone. The princess felt a chill as she realized how close she had come to potential harm during what she had thought was a peaceful, safe walk in familiar surroundings. Detective Chief Inspector Hayes studied Laura's face as she revealed her identity as Queen Camilla's daughter, watching for any signs of deception or manipulation. The family connection explained much about how she had gained knowledge of Catherine's routines and palace layout, but it also created a diplomatic nightmare that would require delicate handling. Hayes immediately understood that this case would need to involve the highest levels of palace administration. Queen Camilla arrived at the security office with a mixture of dread and confusion, expecting to hear about threats against her stepchildren or husband. When Hayes gently explained that the incident involved her own daughter, Lavra, the queen consort's face went white. She had to sit down as the full implications of what might have happened crashed over her. The secret she had kept for decades had nearly resulted in tragedy. Lavra heard her mother's voice in the corridor outside the interview room and felt her stomach clench with a mixture of longing and terror. This was the confrontation she had wanted to force, but not under these circumstances. She had imagined dramatically revealing herself at a public event, not sitting in a security office after nearly committing an act of violence against an innocent woman. Catherine was in her private office when her personal secretary informed her about the true nature of the morning's security incident. The princess felt a complex mix of emotions learning that she had been targeted by someone connected to her own family. The randomness of threats from unknown individuals was one thing, but being endangered by internal family dysfunction was deeply disturbing. Hayes made the decision to allow Queen Camilla to speak with Lavara, but under carefully controlled conditions with security personnel present. The family connection couldn't be ignored, and addressing the underlying relationship issues might be crucial for preventing future incidents. However, he also needed to ensure that justice was served for the serious crime that had been committed. When Queen Camilla first saw Lavra in the interview room, the resemblance was unmistakable despite the years of separation. Lavra had inherited her mother's distinctive eyes and facial structure, though stress and anger had hardened her features in ways that made Camilla's heart ache. The queen consort realized with crushing guilt how much she had failed this daughter. Lavra stood when her mother entered the room, unsure whether to expect anger, disappointment, or rejection. What she saw instead was genuine shock and what appeared to be remorse. For a moment, neither woman spoke, the weight of decades of secrets and missed opportunities filling the space between them. Like a physical presence, Camilla spoke first, her voice breaking as she asked if Lavra was unharmed and apologized for the circumstances that had brought them together. The queen consort had spent years telling herself that maintaining Laura's secrecy was protecting everyone involved. But seeing her daughter in a police interview room made the hollowness of those justifications impossible to ignore. Sarah continued monitoring the situation from an adjacent observation room, taking notes on the family dynamics that were unfolding. The detective was struck by the genuine emotion displayed by both women, which confirmed her assessment that Laura's actions had been driven by abandonment trauma rather than calculated terrorism. This distinction would be important for both the legal proceedings and any rehabilitation efforts. Lavra found herself crying as she tried to explain to her mother how years of secrecy had poisoned her sense of self-worth and belonging. She described watching Camilla's public appearances and wondering if her mother ever thought about her, feeling like a shameful secret that needed to be hidden away. The pain in her voice was unmistakable and affected everyone in the room. Hayes observed the interaction carefully, understanding that he was witnessing a family reconciliation that had been delayed by decades of poor choices. However, he also couldn't lose sight of the fact that Lavra had brought an explosive device onto royal property, with the intention of creating an incident that could have resulted in serious injury or death. Catherine requested a private meeting with Hayes to discuss the incident and its implications for her family's security. The princess was particularly concerned about how to explain the situation to her children without causing them unnecessary fear about their safety. She was also processing the strange reality that someone she had never met had targeted her because of their relationship to her mother. Law. Queen Camilla asked Lavra about her life over the years they had been separated, and each answer deepened her sense of maternal failure. Learning that Lavra had struggled financially while watching the royal family's wealth displayed publicly was particularly painful. Camilla realized that her monthly payments had been perceived as hush money, rather than inadequate expressions of love and support. Lavra surprised herself by asking about her half-siblings, and whether they knew of her existence. She had always wondered if Tom and the others were aware they had a secret sister, and whether they would have wanted a relationship with her if they had known. This question revealed that her anger had been mixed with genuine longing for family connection. The bomb disposal team finished their analysis of Laura's device and confirmed that it contained enough explosive material to cause serious injury within a 3-meter radius. This technical assessment meant that regardless of Laura's intentions, she had created a weapon capable of causing significant harm. The legal implications were severe, even with her cooperation and apparent remorse. Hayes received word that news of the security incident was beginning to circulate among palace staff. which meant they had limited time before media attention became a factor. The chief inspector needed to make decisions about charges and detention while also considering the family, relationship, and the desire to handle the situation with appropriate discretion. Catherine spoke with Prince William by phone, briefing him on the situation and discussing how to protect their children from media coverage if the story became public. The prince was shocked to learn about the family connection and concerned about the precedent it might set for other disgruntled relatives who might feel entitled to dramatic gestures for attention. Lavra asked her mother directly why she had never been acknowledged publicly, why the secrecy had been maintained even after Camilla married into the royal family. The queen consort struggled to provide an adequate answer, realizing that her explanations about protecting the monarchy's reputation sounded hollow when weighed against her daughter's obvious suffering. Sarah suggested to Hayes that Lavra might benefit from immediate psychological evaluation and support rather than standard detention procedures. The detective had observed signs of severe emotional distress that went beyond normal criminal behavior, and she believed that addressing the underlying mental health issues might be more effective than purely punitive measures. Queen Camilla made a decision that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. She asked Hayes if it would be possible for Lavra to be released into her custody rather than detained in a standard facility, offering to take full responsibility for her daughter's actions and ensure her cooperation with the investigation. This request put Hayes in an unprecedented position regarding royal family dynamics and legal procedures. Lavra stared at her mother in disbelief, unable to process that Camilla was offering to take responsibility for her after decades of distance. The gesture felt both too little too late and unexpectedly meaningful, leaving Lavra confused about her own emotions toward the woman she had spent months planning to confront through violence. The afternoon was progressing, and Catherine's hospital visit would need to be evaluated for security risks in light of the morning's incident. The princess insisted that the engagement should proceed as planned, arguing that canceling would disrupt the children's preparations and send the wrong message about letting fear dictate royal duties. Detective Chief Inspector Hayes found himself in uncharted territory as he considered Queen Camilla's unprecedented request to take custody of Lavra. The legal framework had provisions for releasing suspects to responsible parties, but those usually involved conventional family situations rather than royal family members taking responsibility for daughters who had attempted to harm other royals. Hayes knew that his decision would set a significant precedent. Lavra watched her mother's face carefully, trying to determine if this sudden offer of support was genuine or simply damage control for the royal family's reputation. Years of feeling rejected had made her cynical about Camilla's motivations, but the emotion she saw in her mother's eyes seemed authentic. The queen consort appeared genuinely shocked by how far the situation had escalated and determined to take responsibility. Sarah received an urgent message that media outlets had begun picking up reports of unusual security activity at Kensington Palace. The detective knew they had perhaps 2 hours before the story became a full media circus, which would complicate every aspect of the case. The royal family's privacy and Laura's safety could both be compromised if the story broke before they had established a proper narrative. Catherine made the decision to proceed with her hospital visit despite her security team's concerns. The princess believed strongly that royal duties shouldn't be disrupted by personal threats, and she was particularly committed to this engagement because several children had been preparing special presentations for her visit. She insisted that additional security measures would be sufficient to ensure everyone's safety. Hayes consulted with his superiors and legal advisors about the unprecedented situation. The combination of the family relationship, Laura's obvious mental health struggles, and the need for discretion created a complex decision matrix. Traditional law enforcement protocols seemed inadequate for addressing the deeper issues that had led to this crisis. Queen Camilla spent the waiting time trying to understand how she had failed Lavra so completely. The queen consort had convinced herself over the years that maintaining secrecy was protecting everyone involved. But she now realized that her own fear of scandal had prevented her from being the mother Lavra needed. The guilt was overwhelming, but it also strengthened her resolve to make amends. Lavra found herself experiencing emotions she hadn't felt in years as she processed her mother's unexpected support. The anger that had sustained her through months of planning began to give way to a mixture of hope and terror about what a real relationship with her mother might look like. She was also acutely aware that her actions had endangered an innocent woman, and that remorse alone couldn't undo that harm. The bomb disposal team provided their final report, confirming that Laura's device was genuine and dangerous, despite her claims that she hadn't intended serious harm. This technical assessment meant that the legal charges would be severe regardless of her intentions or family connections. Hayes explained to both women that some consequences would be unavoidable, even with family cooperation. Catherine arrived at the children's hospital with enhanced security protocols that were implemented so smoothly that the young patients and staff barely noticed the additional protection. The princess threw herself into the visit with extra enthusiasm, perhaps using the positive interactions to process the morning's disturbing events. She spent extended time with each child, giving them the personal attention that had always characterized her charitable work. Sarah was assigned to coordinate between the hospital security and Catherine's protection detail while monitoring news coverage of the palace incident. The detective found herself thinking about Laura's emotional breakdown and wondering if there were other hidden family members who might pose similar threats in the future. The case highlighted security vulnerabilities that came from within the extended royal family network. Hayes made his decision after consulting with legal experts and royal household officials. He would release Lavra into Queen Camilla's custody with strict conditions including psychological evaluation, regular check-ins with probation services, and a prohibition against approaching any royal properties without explicit permission. The arrangement was unprecedented but seemed appropriate given the unique circumstances. Lavra signed the custody agreement with shaking hands, still struggling to believe that her mother was willing to take public responsibility for her. The queen consort's signature on the document felt like the first real acknowledgement of their relationship she had ever received. However, Lavra also understood that this was just the beginning of a difficult process of rebuilding trust and addressing the damage she had caused. Queen Camilla arranged for Lavra to stay in a private guest suite at Clarence's house rather than returning to her modest apartment, where media might discover her identity. This decision meant that Lavra would be living in royal property for the first time in her life, an irony that wasn't lost on either woman. The queen consort also arranged for discreet psychiatric care to help Lavra process her emotional trauma. Catherine's hospital visit concluded successfully, with no security incidents and positive media coverage of her interactions with the young patients. However, the princess couldn't shake her awareness that someone had planned to harm her that very morning. The randomness of the threat felt particularly unsettling because it had come from within her extended family circle. Sarah completed her incident report, emphasizing Laura's cooperation and the peaceful resolution that had prevented potential tragedy. The detective recommended that the case be handled with consideration for the mental health factors involved while still maintaining appropriate legal consequences. Sarah also suggested enhanced background screening for individuals with royal family connections who might pose similar risks. Hayes briefed Prince William and senior royal household staff on the resolution of the incident, explaining the unusual custody arrangement and ongoing legal processes. The briefing emphasized that while the immediate threat had been neutralized, the case highlighted vulnerabilities in how the royal family managed relationships with extended family members who might feel excluded or abandoned. Lavra spent her first evening at Clarence's house in a state of emotional exhaustion, trying to process the day's events and what they meant for her future. She found herself in luxurious surroundings that highlighted the contrast between her life and her mother's world. But she was also experiencing genuine maternal care for the first time in decades. The complexity of her emotions was overwhelming. Queen Camilla canceled her evening engagements to spend time with Lavara, beginning the difficult process of rebuilding their relationship while also ensuring that her daughter understood the seriousness of her actions. The queen consort was determined to be the mother she should have been all along, while also helping Lavara face the consequences of her choices. Catherine returned to Kensington Palace and briefed Prince William on her hospital visit and her thoughts about the morning's security incident. The couple discussed how to explain the situation to their children in age-appropriate ways while also using it as an opportunity to teach them about family responsibility and the importance of addressing problems through communication rather than violence. As news outlets began reporting on the security incident at Kensington Palace, palace officials worked to manage the narrative without revealing the family connection. The goal was to acknowledge that a threat had been neutralized, while protecting Laura's identity and avoiding speculation about royal family dynamics that could complicate her rehabilitation and legal proceedings. Lavara lay awake in her comfortable bed at Clarence House, staring at the ceiling and wondering what would happen next. She had gotten the confrontation with her mother that she had wanted, but not at all in the way she had planned. The violence she had contemplated seemed foreign to her now, replaced by hope that perhaps it wasn't too late to build the family relationship she had always craved. 6 months after the incident in Kensington Palace Gardens, Lavara Parker Bowles sat in a comfortable chair in her therapist's office, discussing her progress in rebuilding her relationship with her mother and processing the guilt from her actions. The regular therapy sessions had become a cornerstone of her recovery, helping her understand how abandonment trauma had led to such desperate choices. Dr. Sarah Coleman specialized in family dysfunction within high-profile families, and her guidance had been invaluable in helping Lavara develop healthier coping mechanisms. Queen Camilla had surprised everyone, including herself, by how completely she had embraced her role as Laura's mother. The queen consort had quietly rearranged her schedule to spend time with Lavara each week, gradually building the relationship they should have had decades earlier. These private meetings took place away from public scrutiny, allowing both women to explore their emotions without the pressure of royal protocol or media attention. Laura's legal proceedings had concluded with a suspended sentence and mandatory community service, along with the ongoing psychological treatment. The judge had considered her cooperation, her family circumstances, and the expert testimony about her mental state when determining the appropriate consequences. Lavara would spend 2 years working with organizations that supported children from broken homes, using her experience to help others avoid similar destructive paths. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell had been promoted partly due to her handling of the palace incident, and she maintained periodic contact with Lavara as part of the monitoring agreement. Sarah had become something of a mentor figure for Lavara, representing the possibility of channeling strong emotions into positive action rather than destructive behavior. Their conversations often focused on how Lavara could use her intelligence and passion for social justice in constructive ways. Catherine had initially struggled with conflicted feelings about Lavara, understanding intellectually that her attack had been motivated by abandonment rather than personal hatred, but still processing the fear of having been targeted. The princes had chosen to meet with Lavara 3 months after the incident, a conversation that had been healing for both women. Catherine's forgiveness had been crucial for Laura's emotional recovery. The meeting between Catherine and Lavara had taken place in the private sitting room at Clarence House, with Queen Camilla and Prince William also present to provide support. Lavara had prepared extensively for this conversation with her therapist, wanting to offer a genuine apology while also explaining the psychological factors that had led to her actions. The discussion had been emotional but ultimately constructive for everyone involved. Laura's community service assignment at a youth center in East London had become more than just a legal requirement. She discovered a genuine talent for connecting with troubled teenagers who came from difficult family situations similar to her own background. Working with these young people helped Lavara process her own experiences, while also giving her a sense of purpose that had been missing from her life for years. Queen Camilla began including Lavra in some family gatherings, carefully managed to avoid media attention but significant for establishing Laura's place within the extended royal family circle. Laura's half-siblings had been informed of her existence and had responded with curiosity rather than rejection. Tom Parker Bowles, in particular, had made efforts to build a relationship with his previously unknown sister. Sarah Mitchell had been assigned to a new position within royal security that involved identifying and addressing potential internal threats before they could escalate. Laura's case had highlighted gaps in how the royal family managed relationships with extended family members, and Sarah's recommendations had led to new protocols for monitoring and supporting individuals who might feel excluded or abandoned by their royal connections. Catherine's children had been told age-appropriate information about the incident, emphasizing the importance of family communication and seeking help when feeling angry or rejected. Prince George had been particularly interested in the security aspects of the story, while Princess Charlotte had asked thoughtful questions about family relationships and forgiveness. Their responses had reassured Catherine about their emotional resilience and understanding. Lavra had begun writing about her experiences, both as part of her therapy and as a way of potentially helping others who struggled with abandonment issues. Her therapist had encouraged this creative outlet as a means of processing complex emotions, while also finding meaning in her painful experiences. Lavra hoped that sharing her story might prevent others from making similar, destructive choices when facing family rejection. The media had never discovered the full details of the palace incident, knowing only that a security threat had been neutralized without harm to any royal family members. This discretion had been crucial for Laura's rehabilitation and for protecting the royal family from scandal that could have damaged their reputation. The successful management of the crisis had become a model for handling similar sensitive situations. Queen Camilla's relationship with Lavra had deepened as both women worked through decades of missed opportunities and mutual misunderstandings. The queen consort had come to understand that her attempts to protect everyone through secrecy had actually caused more harm than honesty would have created. Their weekly conversations had become opportunities for genuine, emotional connection that neither woman had experienced before. Detective Chief Inspector Hayes had used the case as a training example for royal security personnel, emphasizing the importance of recognizing psychological factors behind security threats and responding with appropriate intervention rather than purely defensive measures. The peaceful resolution of Laura's threat had demonstrated that understanding human motivation could be more effective than simply applying force. Laura's transformation over the 6 months had been remarkable to observe. The angry, desperate woman who had hidden behind palace hedges with an explosive device had evolved into someone who was channeling her intelligence and passion into helping vulnerable young people. Her work at the youth center had given her the sense of family and purpose that she had been seeking through destructive means. Catherine had resumed her normal routine in the palace gardens, though she remained more aware of her surroundings and the people who might be watching her movements. The princess had found that her experience with Lavra had deepened her empathy for people who felt excluded or abandoned by family circumstances. This understanding had influenced her approach to her charitable work with disadvantaged children and families. The incident had ultimately strengthened the royal family's bonds while also forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about how they managed relationships with extended family members. Laura's integration into the family circle, though gradual and carefully managed, had created new possibilities for acknowledging the complex reality of modern royal family dynamics without compromising their public roles. As Lavra sat in her therapist's office 6 months later, reflecting on the journey from desperate anger to genuine healing, she understood that she had found what she had always been seeking through violent means. Her place in the family was still evolving, but it was based on authentic relationships rather than dramatic gestures. The love and acceptance she had craved were finally within reach. achieved through honesty and hard work rather than through threatening the people she had wanted to accept her.